Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, thousands are making desperate journeys across the Mediterranean to get to Europe. With the death toll on their doorstep mounting, is the EU taking the right approach? This story is getting a lot of comments online and from our online community. Also coming with a lot of hashtags. Mika Bilal, help us out with some of those.
Well, you're right. Well, that conversation's happening with some big hashtags that have a lot of usage. So if you take a look at the stream's new app, we're featuring 3 of the biggest ones there. The first is "Don't Let Them Drown." More than 10,000 mentions in the past 30 days. There's also SOS Europe and Migrant Lives Matter, which has about 5,000 mentions in the past month. So of course, we want you to weigh in on this conversation. You can do so via the app or via Twitter with hashtag AJStream.
There are lots of ways for you to stay in touch with us. One of those ways is by checking our Facebook page, and you can see some of the issues we're covering and stories that we're following. And of course, you can send us your show ideas as well.
Hello, my name is Gilles de Kerkhove. I'm the European Union Counter-Terrorist Coordinator, and I am in the street.
Dying for a life in Europe, that's the risk tens of thousands are willing to take as they begin their days-long passage across the Mediterranean. Approximately 36,000 migrants fleeing poverty and war have attempted that journey, often in nothing more than a dinghy. Until last November, they would have been picked up by Mare Nostrum, that's Italy's search and rescue operation. Now the EU borders are monitored by Operation Triton, that's a protection force. So far this year, more than 1,700 people have died trying to make the passage. Officials estimate that around about 1 million are waiting to set sail over the next few months, often from the very poorest borders of Libya. If they arrive on the shores of Malta, Italy or Greece, they are placed in processing centres to await their fate, either resettlement or repatriation, both of which could take up to a year. On Wednesday, the European Parliament debated how to handle the latest tragedies in the Mediterranean. In meetings held earlier in the month, leaders came up with money and assets to improve search and rescue missions while still protecting EU borders. So what is the right solution? To help us discuss this, I'm joined by Larry Macaulay. He is the founder and editor-in-chief at Refugee Radio Network, based in Hamburg, Germany. Matteo De Bellis is an EU team member for Amnesty International. Leonard Doyle is a spokesman for the International Organization for Migration. And Al Jazeera correspondent Barnaby Phillips has just returned from covering the story in Catania, Italy. So good to have you all in the mix, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Larry, and with some pictures that I've been looking at recently. I know a lot of our online community have been having a look at. These are really hard to watch, but this is a boat, it's capsized, it's full of migrants and refugees. This is a real humanitarian crisis right on the doorstep of the European Union. When you look at those pictures, how do you get people to understand these are personal stories, personal tragedies?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. This is the turn of politics that dictate who should live or who should die. I've experienced this firsthand. I passed through those waters myself, and I received people when they arrive on the shores of Italy. So I know what it really takes. It's really pathetic. It's a failure of leadership at all levels. I'm talking of the European Union, the United Nations level, and at the African Union level. Total failure of leadership. The leaders are failing the people. And this is why we must all come together and tackle these issues. That's all I gotta say, Femi, for now.
You talk to refugees all of the time with your radio network. What's the story that stands out for you in your mind from all of the many that they've shared with you?
Yeah, the reason why we decided to create Refugee Radio was basically because we found out that there was no outreach, there was no platform for refugees to hear their voice. I was all over Sicilia last year. I met with 17-year-old, 16-year-old Gambian citizens, young people coming from different countries,
Yeah.
and they all had something to say. I mean, and there was no platform to really get these messages across.
All right.
So
So
I
Lara,
came back and
I'm gonna play one of those little clips. This is Ibrahim. So Ibrahim started in Gambia. He went to Libya and then had to get out of Libya and then ended up in Italy. So that was the journey he took. Have a listen to what he told Refugee Radio.
They took all our belongings, our monies. Some people were being tortured. So in Libya, it was like hell. It was crazy. So this is the reason why I couldn't stay there. And I knew that people are crossing the sea. Then I pay money to cross the sea to come to here, whereby I was expecting that I would have a better life to live. So since I came here, is the way I'm expecting Europe and the way I see Europe, is quite the opposite.
Leonard, these migrant stories, these refugee stories, they've been going on for quite a long time. The journeys they've been having to take, we knew about this, we've known about this for at least a year. We covered this story last year as well. What is it that's actually made us pay more attention right now?
Look, I think it's a couple of things, because actually the numbers of people landing in Europe are a little bit less than they were this time last year. But I think what's happened is that you had a rather difficult and unpopular decision by the European Council to withdraw the life-saving measures, which got a lot of people very upset. So I think there's been a rallying round around the humanitarian imperative that we must save lives. So that's been one important thing. A mistaken decision or a preemptive decision by the European Union to do this has stirred up a lot of concern. And then when you had the terrible tragedy a week ago of perhaps 900 people drowning, I think it suddenly just shook people out of their apathy, really, and got people to stand up and demand action. And we've seen a little bit of a change in the mood music at the highest levels in Europe as a result of that concern.
So Leonard, was the option saving lives or saving money?
Well, I think the option last year was keeping people out of Europe because it's affecting the politics of Europe, and it's creating a kind of swing to the extreme right in many cases. So politicians were voting for their seats, in effect. But the decisions they made weren't necessarily the best ones, and we at the International Organization for Migration have advocated that you have to put saving lives first, and then your policy decisions later. And I think that's kind of what's coming around again. Not as clearly as we want, certainly not as strongly as we want, but there's been a mood change without a doubt.
Well, Barnaby, online, people are asking about who some of these migrants are, and Femi, of course, touched on that with the description of the person that Larry met. But there's a tweet here from Isidera who says, one should differentiate genuine refugees from economic migrants. And she goes on to say, economic migrants, if they can afford to pay traffickers, they're able to make money at home, thus saying that they really shouldn't be making this journey. Barnaby, from the people that you talk to in your reporting, could you tell the difference and what is the mood among people versus who's an asylum seeker and who is an economic migrant?
Yes, you meet both kinds of people. I mean, you meet families who are fleeing war in Syria, and I would say they are almost certainly eligible to be refugees. But you also meet many, many young people from countries in Africa, places like Gambia, Ghana, and they say, look, I've come to Europe because there's no work at home and I want to send money back to my parents. So I disagree with that tweet. We're not talking about wealthy people who can necessarily even afford their passage back. But yes, technically speaking, those people are economic migrants. They're not asylum seekers, and they are much less likely to be eligible for settlement in Europe. Having said that, we've got to be realistic. Very, very few people are actually deported from Europe. What tends to happen to these people in a country like Italy is that they are unsuccessful in their asylum request, and then they slip through the cracks. And that's when they're very vulnerable. If they're women, they might go into prostitution. If they're men, they may end up laboring in farms in southern Italy run by criminal gangs. And that's where you get the really tragic stories.
Matteo, you've just come back from working with Amnesty right there on the Mediterranean. What is the reaction from the public? Because it must be quite difficult for the public who are living in these areas where they're seeing a lot of migrants and refugees. I've even seen pictures of people sunbathing on Greek beaches and literally refugees dying on the coastline right where they're sunbathing. The pictures are surreal. So how are the local populations reacting to the migrants? Because that's an important relationship too.
Well, there are mixed reactions. Of course, there are some people who are more welcoming and supportive and others who are contributing to a toxic narrative that we are seeing dominating much of the public debate. But let me take a step back and go back to the points raised by others. We are talking about people, first of all, and we need to clarify that refugees, economic migrants are all categories that make a lot of sense for us who studied law and others. But actually, we have people in this moment dying at sea because they don't see any other way to get to Europe. So the first operation that Europe should set is a humanitarian operation to save those lives at sea. Then we will see how to manage the influx of people and how to attribute different legal statuses to people. So it is fundamental that the discussions that have been had in the past week are then followed by concrete actions in the next few days to create a new joint operation in the central Mediterranean to save lives.
What is the European strategy right now, Leonard? What's the plan?
Well, I mean, the European strategy has been focused on stopping the boats effectively, and that has changed slightly following the recent disaster. I mean, I think public outrage at the lack of saving lives has made a temporary change, and that needs to continue. But the danger is, of course, is that the politicians will be driven by effectively the extreme right and the tilt to the right in European politics. I mean, we need to remember that most migrants for millennia have been economic migrants. Europe has been migrating people abroad to the rest of the world for such a long time. It needs a complete mindset change and to start accepting that you need to have...
This is Larry you hear in the background. Larry, just give us a pause for a moment. Leonard, finish your sentence. I know Larry wants to debate with you.
The danger we have is that there is kind of a policy of putting your head in the sand like an ostrich in Europe at the moment. The politics has been driven by the extremists in the local political arena. Right. We see, for example, UKIP, now the third largest party in the United Kingdom.
All right, so Leonard, I asked you to finish your sentence because it is a discussion and I want now to be able to discuss with you. So to get to a point where you're happy, finish that sentence and then Larry's going to come right back in.
I mean, in terms of European politics, we're seeing a change because of the rallying of international public opinion, but we need to see a lot more, and we need to see real politics that will allow for migrants to come to Europe to meet the demand for work and be allowed to return home and help their families. I think it's the irregular migration that's causing the confusion and the chaos.
Okay.
Both in...
I think European policies fueled the mass exodus of people from Africa, because if they didn't destroy the fabric of society in Libya in the first place, we will not be where we are today. Okay, so let's get something straight. You know, we'll take for instance, I read on the internet an MP in the United Kingdom says boats should be shot at so that it will deter people from coming to Europe. Europe did this last year. They withdrew funding for Mare Nostrum and they brought Frontex Plus and Creton. And what do we have today? 100-fold of deaths at sea. So this is a failure. But the Vatican has stepped up.
Larry, I'm going to interrupt that.
Go ahead, Barnaby.
At the beginning, you quite rightly said this was a failure of leadership across the board. Yes, you're right. Europe's involvement in Libya left an awful mess. But if you look at where other people are coming from, I was struck, for example, two small countries in Africa, Gambia and Eritrea. Neither of them are at war at the moment, although I know Eritrea has a long-running frozen conflict with Ethiopia.
Barnaby, would you have allowed me to finish before you jumped in?
Yeah, but Larry, you were jumping in with Leonard before he finished, so you take a pause. Now you know what it feels like. Barnaby, you go ahead. We'll come back to you, Larry.
I would ask President Jammeh of Gambia and President Afwerki of Eritrea why so many young people are running away from their countries. And that is not Europe's fault.
Okay, now, what has Europe done to stop Yahya Jammeh and the dictator in Eritrea? They've not said anything. They were so fast to go and brought out the resolution 1973 against Gaddafi. So what is different between Gaddafi, Jammeh, and this guy in Eritrea?
So Larry, before we go into global politics and slightly away from this conversation, although I do understand the context that you're putting us in, let me just go back to our community. They want to join in the conversation.
Well, we're hearing actually from Europeans who come on both sides of the divide on whether or not Mare Nostrum, which we talked about earlier, was a good thing to have been stopped and what should happen now. So here's a video comment from Monica out of Brussels, and hear what she had to say.
Italy was right in organizing Mare Nostrum. It was wrong in cancelling it. European governments seem to have given up to the idea that we cannot take any migrant or refugee anymore. This is, of course, false. We need organization and political will. We cannot open our border indiscriminately, but we can do more of what we do today.
So, Matteo, you hear that. On the other hand, we got a tweet from Dean. He writes, Italy quite rightly stopped policing Europe's borders alone. So you see the divide there. But aside from that debate, I know that you're actually talking to migrants. You have a story from a Somali man, a 17-year-old. Can you tell us that story?
First of all, let me say that, yes, indeed, cancelling Mare Nostrum was a mistake, and that this is one of the reasons that have taken the death toll in the following months so high as we have seen in the past few months, because as it has been said before, the influx of people has been pretty much stable if compared with last year, but the number of people who died at sea has increased enormously. Now, yes, I've been talking about their stories with a number of people who survived shipwrecks and made the crossing in the past few days, weeks, and months during several missions in Italy. I would like to mention, for example, the story of a Nigerian woman, just 19, whom I met last week in Lampedusa. She escaped from an attack of Boko Haram to her house in Nigeria. She fled while her mom was killed in the attack. She fled together with her sister, but the sister disappeared and she doesn't know the whereabouts of her sister. She ended up in Libya, where she unfortunately fell into the hands of traffickers. She was forced to work as a prostitute for several months, and then she managed to flee and to get on a boat to Italy, and she was rescued in an operation by the Italian authorities last week. These are the people we are talking about. These are the people who have been talking to us. People like this woman from Nigeria escaping from Boko Haram, people like the tens of Somali and Eritreans I've been speaking with in past weeks and months, people like thousands of Syrians who have been fleeing the conflict there. And let me also say that the current situation in Libya with conflicts and lawlessness and violence all around are actually one of the key factors pushing people on the boats. So it is extremely important that on one side, we address the situation immediately by launching an operation to save lives at sea, but on the other side also that we help reduce the number of people who feel compelled to take this dangerous trip.
Okay.
And Europe so far has not done enough because it has sealed its land borders, pushing more people actually in the hands of the smugglers, while it has to do more resettling refugees, opening humanitarian channels, and increasing the number of people who are offered a safe and legal opportunity to get to Europe.
All right, let me share something with our audience here. Have a look here on my laptop. This is Mediterranean Sea migration routes. Can you make out the various different coastlines? This is the North African coastline here. Everywhere where you see purple is a migration route heading across from North Africa across towards the southern part of the Med into southern Europe, and then on and up further towards the north. Okay, so those are the many migration routes. Leonard.
Exactly.
Migration is not going to stop. Whether you call them refugees, economic migrants, it's not going to stop. So Should there be a system and maybe official migration routes? How do you deal with this? So many ways of getting from the north coast of Africa towards Europe. Even if you police them to the max, you're not going to stop migrants or refugees. What do you do then?
You're absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the day, we need a managed migration process so you can match labor supply and labor demand. You have hardworking people. We see them from Africa. Just putting aside the refugees, but lots of hardworking people and lots of need for work so that Europe can remain a competitive economy. So an example of what would work in Canada, they need people to help in the harvesting of their crops, of their wine, of their grapes, of their tomatoes and apples and what have you. We, IOM, help them get workers from the highlands of Guatemala. They're brought to Canada with a multiple entry visa. They work for a couple of months and they go back happy because they've got money to give their family, not money to a smuggler. They're not on the wrong side of the law. This is what you call a managed process. Now, it's not the solution for everything in Europe, but we have to start thinking like this and stop shouting at each other and stop being hysterical, because we now have policy by populism rather than sensible policies. And we need a little bit less heat in the debate and a little bit more common sense.
All right, Larry, I think that's pointed towards you. You've got about a sentence left, Larry, because we're going to push on with the end of this show. So go on very briefly.
Okay, I think Europe has got the ability to take all these migrants. Countries like Germany, for instance, they need a lot of labor force to come in, but they're just hiding behind bureaucracy and reckless politicians. That's why we don't get headway. So Europe can take a lot. They're grumbling that they are taking a lot, but they're really not taking a lot. There's a lot of refugees in Jordan and in Lebanon, you know? So this is just like hypocritical failure of leadership at all levels. Like I said, every time, it's just a failure, total failure.
We're going to come back to Larry and Leonard and Matteo and Barnaby. We're going to do that in the post-show in just a moment. But before we do that, Malika, you wanted to round us up with this part of the conversation.
Yes, I want to give us a teaser for the post-show. This is one we just got in from Ito, who says, the problem is not just an EU problem. The African Union also needs to be held to some account. And I know we can talk about that, of course, in the post-show.
All right. And also, I should say that Al Jazeera Network is doing a lot of special coverage on desperate journeys around the world. So do look at aljazeera.com and also on TV as well. And you'll see many more of those stories. But right now, here's Malika with some of the other stories the stream is following.
I wear my skirt as I like. That's the message many are sending to a French school that banned a Muslim student from wearing a skirt deemed too long. According to a local French paper, the school called the skirt a sign of religious affiliation, saying it violated a law that guarantees secularism. Well, many, angered by the decision, tweeted images like these of celebrities who have worn long skirts in France. Others questioned the implications of the law. Miriam tweets, is it really a liberal democracy when people are being excluded for what they choose to wear? Well, next to Hong Kong, where you may want to think twice about littering. That's after an environmental organization came up with a way to use DNA found on litter to make a visual representation of the person who dropped the trash. The Face of Litter campaign will display these images across the city in an effort to change behaviors. Well, Gonjijan from Indonesia tweets, if this were in our country, almost all citizens' faces would be plastered. And finally, as boxers Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao gear up for the fight of the century, many are questioning Mayweather's history of domestic violence. According to ESPN, the boxer has faced numerous allegations and been convicted of domestic violence charges. Because of this, some are calling on fans to boycott Saturday's fight. Gina tweets, Mayweather convicted 5 times. Will make $100 million on the fight. Every buy is a middle finger to women. But RPW pushed back, saying Mayweather has fought 8 times since his recent domestic violence charge, and it wasn't a problem then. Well, you can get more on this story and others at stream.aljazeera.com. Femi?
I love the Face of Litter campaign, Malika.
Of course.
How does the science work for that?
I'm not exactly sure, but I know that it will shame people.
Because there's so many applications, like who keeps turning the temperature up and down. You could do a little DNA on that, and then you could find out who did it. Just give me a few ideas around the building. All right, so I just have enough time to tell you about our next show. 40 years after the end of the Vietnam War, the physical scars remain. We're going to be looking at the health crisis that's still going on. Until then, I'll see you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Post Show. We're discussing the perilous Mediterranean crossing and Europe's approach to that. I'm going to get right back to that with Barnaby. Barnaby, I'm hearing a lot of opinion in this conversation. I'd like to hear from your perspective, the reporting that you did. What are we missing from this story so far?
Well, what I noticed was the very, very drained and exhausted state of people as they got off boats. It was very, very moving to see that. I noticed there were distinctions. Often the Syrians who came were better organized. They had more money. They had paid smugglers more. They had traveled in greater comfort. And when they arrived in Italy, they had networks to help them. They had money. They knew exactly where they were going. Whereas there were some groups from Africa who were much more vulnerable, who arrived penniless. I mean, I met an 18-year-old boy from Guinea-Bissau. He had no money, he had no friends, he had no telephone, he had no idea what to do next. He was so naive, I have to say this, that he admitted that he was 2 months over 18, which made him not a minor and which will make his eventual asylum application much more difficult. Because let's be honest, some migrants, don't tell the whole truth about their story in order to enhance their prospects of staying in Europe. And he did not even have the nous or the cunning to do that.
See, Larry, there must be now a whole network of migrants and refugees helping other migrants and refugees get to Europe. For instance, advising young people. Maybe you should say your age is this age. Maybe you should say you come from this country, not that country. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How's the network?
That's the way it is. That's what we try to do with Refugee Radio. We have a lot of workshops we try to do. We're not getting funding from anybody. This is just our money that we put into it. And Refugee Radio is run by refugees, no other parties there. I was all over southern Italy last year, and I saw young 16, 17 years. I mean, the age gap between 17 and 25. These are the vibrant age in Africa. These guys are ready to take any risk. From Spain, Morocco, Spain, to Libya, Lampedusa. They are ready
Larry,
to take
sometimes
any
I heard
risk.
the boats are called the death boats. Why would you get on a death boat?
Well, they are running for something. I asked the guys from Gambia last year, I remember, what's wrong with you guys? What's Yahya Jammeh doing wrong? And they said they don't have freedom of expression. They don't have independent minds. So they don't want this anymore. They think they can get that in Europe.
Do they know what they're in for, Larry?
No, absolutely no.
Right.
I mean, I had to tell them because many of them felt the shock, the cultural shock when they got to Europe. In the south of Italy, there was a lot of racist discrimination against them. Italians were running away from them because they were blacks. And they felt so disappointed that this is not the Europe they see on TV, So I had to tell them that, man, the picture is bigger than what you're seeing now. You're just in a remote part in the south of Italy. You still have a long way to go. And this is the way to go. These are the process you still have to wait. It's a lengthy period. They could end up waiting for 2 years to get European document, to get an Italian document. And that does not guarantee anything because at the end of the day, they might end up on the streets of Europe, be it in Rome, be it in Brussels, be it in Frankfurt, anyway. That's the reality. And that's where we come in. We try to work with them. We try to talk to them. We use theater to do this so that they could be equipped. We've asked for fundings, but I mean, nobody really wants to help because the real story, solving the problems, the wider European community does not want to solve the problem. They just want to see people in miserable conditions, So this is why, because I find everybody complacent, including myself, because we vote, wrong leaders into power, and these leaders take decisions that affect us all, including African leaders. So it's not just a European one-way story now, because the African Union has not stood up to this debts.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I heard a lot of European. People are running from countries in Africa.
I mean, Mandela is there doing. Where are all the Mandelas until, this is the vacuum that is there. That's why I say most of the leaders in Africa now at the moment are a total failure, because they're not really working.
All right, Larry, take a breath for a moment, because some other people want to talk to you and to our other guests. Malika.
Well, I'm actually glad Larry brought that up, because it answered the tweet we ended our main show with, so that is an answer to that. But I want to push on just a little bit, because Leonard, you heard Larry say that people are so desperate that they'll take any risk to leave, and part of that is putting their lives really in the hands of smugglers. So of course, there is an EU initiative to target people smuggling, and we asked our community what they thought about that. This is one person's idea. She says targeting the smugglers will increase risk-taking and smuggling fees, and it'll put migrants even more in vulnerable positions. What's your take?
Well, I think what we need to be careful of is that smugglers are criminals. And for example, in Libya, you find smuggling gangs, militias, extorting vast amounts of money off migrants who are trying to do nothing better but go on ahead and get a job. So these militias, they're charging $1,000 a head. You have a boat of 100 people, that's $100,000 for a decrepit plastic boat. The money that's being pumped into the criminal side of the economy is vast. And that's really why you need to target the smugglers. Sometimes, of course, they're helping refugees get to a better place. But in the big picture, they're bringing instability and danger to societies that we need to help reinforce and build some structures in.
Leonard, is that targeting happening already?
Yeah.
Is that's targeting of smugglers happening already? I'm just curious how you do that.
Well, the targeting of smugglers is not really happening, because they control so much wealth and so much weaponry, for example, in Libya, that the state, such as it is, cannot compete against it. At the borders, we know the border guards have their AK-47s. The smuggling gangs, the militias, just push them aside, and they have to go and have a cup of tea while they bring the migrants through, because there is so much profit in it.
Larry,
then the problem is that
take a breath for a moment, so Leonard can finish.
What I think is worth noting then is that they terribly mistreat the migrants. There are 3,000 to 4,000 migrants in Tripoli Zoo today. Why are they there? The people holding them say they're keeping them there to keep the community safe. How could that possibly be keeping the community safe? The problem is that when you have illegality and criminality, you have abuse of people. So we need to get back to a normal situation where the state is supported, where there is a process where people can legally migrate and legally return, where refugees get the due process and refugees too need to work. I mean, we talk a lot about refugees, but essentially the whole group are economic migrants seeking a better place and seeking to work and improve their lives. And Europe also needs them. Europe is aging. Who is going to look after the elderly in Europe? Who's going to pick the crops? How will the society remain competitive if we do not have a hard-working workforce?
See, Leonard, you're speaking very logically, and this is amazing common sense. Who else is speaking the same language that you're speaking that counts in Europe?
Well, I think the